The Portrait Wizard helps you quickly and automatically build your portrait pages for your book. The software supports a mixture of candid pages and portrait pages within a single section. So before you launch into the Portrait Wizard, it's a good idea to navigate to the page in your section where you want the portrait pages to begin. Once you've selected that page, click the Portrait Wizard button, which is located on the Layouts tab. The first dialog lets you select your portrait folders for use in the section. All of the portrait folders that are loaded on the software are listed on the left. To add them to this portrait page, simply drag them to the right. You can drag as many folders as you want and queue up all your portrait pages in a row in a single section. Or you can also choose not to select any folders at this time. If you do that, you'll start with a blank panel page, and then you can autoflow your photos from the Photos tab into it later on. Once you've selected your folders, click OK, and the main Portrait Wizard dialog will appear. At the top left of the dialog, you have your portrait settings, which consist mainly of rows and columns, and then various adjustments that refer to the layout of your portraits on the page. Next, over to the right, you have your text settings, which allow you to control the header text as well as the name text and various font, size, and style attributes. At the bottom left, you have your flow settings. These control the transition from one class folder to the next folder. And then just over to the right, you have your Apply and Save section. The Apply to Page button allows you to apply the current settings to the current page, and then the Previous and Next buttons allow you to navigate through the section and apply your settings to each subsequent page. Down at the bottom, you have a Help section. When you launch the Portrait Wizard, it gives you instructions on clicking Apply and then using the Previous and Next page buttons. This is very important in terms of learning how to navigate and use the controls in the Portrait Wizard. Below the preview, you have navigation icons that show you where you are in the current section. And then below that, you have some text that helps you lay out your pages according to the number of photos that you have selected in your folders. In this case, it shows that I have 70 portraits in 2 folders. I need 6 pages with the current portrait settings. The Portrait Wizard will help you lay out your pages, but it's usually best to have a basic idea of the number of students per class and about how you'd like to lay out your pages. I know that I have between about 30 to 40 students per class in the 2 folders that I selected, so we'll start by adjusting the rows and columns accordingly. I'll go ahead and update this to 6 rows and 6 columns. Down at the right, you'll see that the text also updated. Since 6 by 6 is 36, I now need 2 pages to display the total of 70 portraits in 2 folders. So you can make these adjustments and view the text to get a basic idea of how you should set this up. Once you're ready, you can apply it to the page, and your settings will get applied to the page, and the preview will update. From this point forward, the preview will continue to update as you make changes. For example, if I change this to 7 rows, it'll update, and you'll see that I now have 1 blank row at the end. I know my next class might be a little bit bigger, and I also want some room to add some students potentially later on, so I think I'll go ahead and stick with this layout. I can adjust some other things in the portrait settings, such as a top margin, which moves everything down according to the setting here so that I can make room for a header or maybe some clip art or some other elements. The image gap adjusts the amount of space in between the portraits so I can tighten everything up a bit. You can play with all of these different settings and see live how they affect your page. Next, we have the text settings. If I want to add a header, I can type in the header information here, and then I can also adjust the font size, as well as the font color. The name position allows me to move the names from the outside to the center below the portraits. When I made that change, you'll see that I get warnings all over my preview. The description for this warning is shown down here in the help section. This warning means that not all the text will fit below these images. And so at this point, I can make some adjustments until all those warnings go away. For example, one option I have is to make the text smaller. If I make it 8 point, the page will update. Most of them fit, but still not quite all of them fit. So the other thing I can do is make the names go to 2 lines. That solved the problem, and all of the names will now fit on this panel page. I prefer my names on the outside, so I'm going to go back to that. You can play around with all these settings as much as you like. And remember, once you see the warnings, you always want to clear those up by adjusting the current settings that are available. Next, I've got my flow settings down below. The flow settings adjust the transition from one class folder to the next. In this case, I have 2 class folders. If for some reason I wanted the next class to start in the very next photo, the very next position, I can choose that button and the next class will start right here. Or I can have the class start on the next line, or in my case, on the next page. So in this case, one class ends and the next class starts on the following page. Once I've got my settings the way I like them, I'll click Apply to Page one more time to make sure they're applied to the page, and then I'll click Next Page, and I'll apply them to the next page. The same settings get applied to the next page, and the next folder automatically flows in. Once you click OK, all of these settings will be applied to the actual pages, and your portraits will be flowed in. That's how easy it is to use the Portrait Wizard to create your portrait pages. But before we click OK, let's look at a couple of other things. First of all, let's look at the Save Settings feature. We recommend that you always save your settings once you have a final version of your panel pages. Type in the name for your settings and click Save Settings. All of these settings are now saved in this drop-down menu. You can pull these settings up again on another panel page, or if you need to come back into this panel page at another time, and those settings will all be loaded. This is a great way to save a lot of time and make sure that you have identical portrait pages throughout your entire book. Save settings are also important in the event that you need to reflow your photos. For example, if the PSPA CD gets updated with new students in the class, you'll need to come back into this section, come into the Portrait Wizard, and then click Apply to Page with the additional students. That will update the entire page with the current settings and the new students. In that scenario, it's best to come back in, select your settings, and then click Apply to Page, so that way you don't have to redo all of this again. So again, it is a good habit to get into to save your settings for each of your panel pages. And you can save as many different settings as you would like to and have different styles of panel pages throughout the book. Next, let's talk about how we add teachers to a portrait page. There are 2 ways to do this in the software. Option number 1 is to select the teacher frame option under portrait settings. If I choose yes, it will add a teacher frame to the page and then update the preview. The teachers can be managed in a separate folder and then dragged and dropped into this individual teacher slot. The other option for adding teachers without the teacher frame is to flow teachers into the first position or positions along with the students in the portrait page at the same size as the students. In order to do this, navigate to the Manage Photos page and then the Portraits tab and find the selection of class photos. And then select the photos that are teachers and click the Teacher checkbox. That will designate the photo as a teacher, and each teacher will flow into the first position regardless of alphabetical order. If you look at the instructions on the Manage Photos page, you'll also see that you can use numbers such as -1, -2, and -3 to control the order of multiple teachers as they flow into the page. Finally, note that you can use the Previous and Next Page buttons to move through your section and only apply portraits to the pages that you designate. This allows you to have candid pages followed by portrait pages followed by candid pages within a single section. We'll click OK to apply our settings to our pages. Your pages have now been updated with your portrait settings and all of your portraits automatically flowed in. At this point, you now have control over the design of the page using a lot of the same editing tools that you had available for working with candid pages. The software will maintain the relationship between the photos and their respective names even as you move things around and potentially delete portraits to make room for other elements. When you update any students on the Manage Photos page on the Portraits tab, the software will also remind you to make sure and come back here and autofill your portraits to pick up any new photos that have been added to that folder. Please spend some time playing with the different features in the Portrait Wizard and feel free to contact support or review the documentation for any additional questions. We think you'll find that it's a powerful, intuitive, and easy to use tool that will help you create some great looking portrait pages for your book.